Well, more than 300 million people who live in our country drive every day, of course, but when does driving become a risk? There is no set age nationwide for when we should stop driving.
So we looked at the rules for aging drivers, and it really varies from state to state. Most require a renewal with a vision test every 4 to 5 years after the age of 69. Take a look at this map. There were a handful of states that allow people 70 and older to go 6 and sometimes 8 years without a test.
Now, we know when this comes up in conversation, it can be a difficult conversation. A lot of families are having it right now, in fact, as parents age, and it's not always easy. So this morning, we are going to help you with that conversation. When is the right time to consider possibly taking the keys away from an aging driver? Joining us with some pointers and helpful hints is Kim Barnes. She is the co-founder of Parenting Aging Parents. Kim, we want to say welcome back to Morning on Marriage Street. It is so good to see you, my friend. I want to dive right in with how do we know that it's even time to start talking about a friend or loved one's driving? What are some of the physical signs we should be looking for?
It is really tough because, you're taking away someone's independence. So this is not something that you want to do lightly. But, sometimes when you're starting to look for obvious signs, are they having fender benders? Do you see dents in their car? Are you afraid to drive with them when you're with them and you feel like, okay, this doesn't feel very safe? Are they getting lost? Those kinds of things. And then also there's some things that you can also be noticing. Are they tending to fall a lot when they're just up and around? Because there have been studies that have shown that there's a correlation between the more somebody is falling, the more likely they might be to be in an accident. And of course, looking for memory issues or physical issues as well, because there are so many physical issues like your vision and hearing that can really have a huge impact.
Yes, absolutely. And medications that people take and whatnot. I mean, Kim, this was a personal experience for me. My mom had a couple of fender benders, and it was a discussion. And even I was able to get her to agree to it. But sometimes there are multiple conversations that have to take place in order for that to happen. How do you approach that subject sensitively?
I think the best thing we can do is actually have these conversations way before we need them. While they're still driving well, have that conversation. Hey, Mom or Dad, what should we do, or how should we handle it if you get to a point where we feel like it might not be safe for you to drive anymore? I actually had a friend who wrote herself a letter and said, when my daughter says maybe I'm not safe to drive anymore, I need to listen to her. And she gave that letter to her daughter and said, save this, and hopefully it's not anytime soon, but when you feel like it's time, show this to me so that I'll remember. But it's also having those conversations when you can have facts. Are you noticing that they have had these fender benders and that they can understand that? And of course, when there's dementia involved, this does make it really tricky because that may or may not be realistic. They may not remember some of those things. I know personally with my mom, it started because we were worried about her vision. She had this eye surgery, and so it wasn't going to be safe for her to drive, at least for a while, with her vision. And then that led to the conversation later because we knew that she wasn't really supposed to be driving. And I found out that she was just taking the car for a little drive down the street in her neighborhood because she was afraid the battery was going to die if it was sitting there idle for so long. And for me, it was looking for what could I appeal to her? Because when it can be their decision, like Dominique, like you mentioned, when it's their decision, it's going to make it so much easier. They're not going to be mad at you. They're not mad at somebody else. So for my mom, it was appealing to her. Hey, Mom, if you're out driving in the neighborhood and you were to hit a kid on their bicycle, oh my gosh, I know you would feel awful. Let's just let's make that not be part of the equation. And so that was how I sort of appealed to her in that respect. And then also for her, financial was a consideration too. Hey, Mom, think about how much money you're going to save if you're not having to pay for gas and insurance and other car expenses. So sometimes it's figuring out what might appeal to them. And then certainly you can ask friends in our Parenting Aging Parents Facebook group. This question comes up all the time.
Yeah.
And so learning from others and what have they tried to see what might be effective.
That,
Unfortunately, it's still hard though.
Yeah, it reduces so much anxiety when both parties are able to come and have a great conversation like you just described. What about those instances where the conversation doesn't go so well and the person doesn't want to talk about it, or the parent or loved one is saying, well, I'm fine, you know, because really it is affecting their independence.
Yeah.
And I feel like I might come to that point at one point where it's going to not be an easy conversation, especially when you talk about someone who's used to being very active and used to being very independent.
Yes, it absolutely. You know, when you turn 15 or 16, that's sort of the sign that you're more of a grown-up, that you can go and do and on your timeline. And so it can be a conversation that we don't want to take lightly. And if you're having trouble where your parent is just sort of shutting down and saying, no, I'm fine, there's no issues here, you might see if they're open to having some third-party validation. You know, can you get the doctor involved? Is there somebody else that they really respect their opinion? There are organizations out there that can do an objective evaluation. And so would they do that? And even some driver license offices will let you go in and do a voluntary test. Now, again, they may not want, if they maybe think there might be something wrong but don't want to admit it, they may not agree to do that. If it comes down to you really worry about their safety and the safety of others, most driver license offices will let you submit a report or a request, most anonymously, where you can say, I think this person might not be safe, and they can start a review process where it could include them coming in and requiring them to take a test to be able to keep their license.
Perfect. Kim, this is so helpful.
Yeah.
I know that you're reaching a lot of families this morning with this information. We greatly appreciate it. It's a sensitive subject, but a conversation that needs to be had. And if you want more information about Kim and her Facebook group, Parenting Aging Parents, you can go right there and check her out, as well as the website. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.